put that open so you can see a little better? I do that all the time.
Yeah, that's where you really know the new power is flying. That's I would feed right after that Alice. This was a fuel injection case. It didn't have Those ball bearing jackasses, man, they'll throw you. What's that? What is the snow? You're getting on that.
Sometimes the large. We're already out of next month. It's tiny. Like in white.
Yeah, I didn't shut my ran off, did I?
It goes on like you think you're going to get slowed down. About halfway down the road, it's faded in. And you can push as It may be seen this airplane before. It used to be painted white with the gold stripe down the side. Had a rainbow on the back behind the canopy. And it was lovingly referred to as Rainbow Rider. It's been called many other names, but that's the best one. And there's a reason for it being painted blue. Hopefully it's a good reason and it will prove the theory that was behind it. Dan Deal told me that blue adds reliability. So I painted the engine blue, the wheels blue, the airplane blue, the interior's blue. The only thing that's not painted blue is the little white tips on the prop, and I should have painted those blue. But this airplane, as you can tell, has had a few modifications to it. It started off as a regular KR2 as far as the fuselage is concerned. And in fact, I had the fuselage built and the tail feathers on it made out of green foam and glass. And I took it to the Kerrville Air Show in about 1979. And while it was there, somebody poked their finger through the back end of the stabilizer on it. And when I come back and I looked at that, I won't tell you what went through my mind, but when I got it home, I decided I'm not going to build this airplane out of green foam and glass. And I had a friend that was building helicopter parts out of a material called Plagicell. What that is, it's a 1/4-inch polyvinyl chloride foam, and it's red in color, it's fire resistant, it's expensive as can be. And he was building tooling that you laid this stuff up in the molds with the fiberglass and the resin, sealed it in a Mylar bag overnight at 28 inches of vacuum, And in the morning, when you come in and pop this thing out of the mold, you had a real light, strong piece of fiberglass, and it was going to keep that shape. And you couldn't poke a finger through it, and you would work at poking a screwdriver through it. And I thought, that's really great because I'm clumsy with screwdrivers and I'll drop it on it so many times maybe it won't matter, you know. And so I told him, I said, you know, I'm going to build the parts for my airplane out of this stuff. And he says, no, you aren't. And I says, well, why not? He says, you'll spend the rest of your life building the tooling to make the part. And I said, I don't care. I'm not going to take my airplane to an air show and be afraid to walk back and look at it. And he was right. I spent 1,200 hours building molds. Well, I built molds for the inboard wings, the outboard wings, top and bottom. I built molds for the horizontal stabilizer, top and bottom, left and right. For the elevator, top and bottom, for the vertical fin, left and right, and for the rudder, left and right. Well, if you start counting those up, you get gray hair by the time you're through with it, but I finally got all the mold and tooling done, and I built the parts for the airplane. Well, essentially what you've done by the time you got through doing that is you've built yourself about 3 KRs almost, because you start off building a plug for the mold. Then after you essentially built the wing and horizontal stabilizer and elevator and rudder and all that, now you're going to shoot a mold on it, okay? So you grease that thing down with whatever mold release you're going to shoot. Now you shoot a mold, you get through with that, which is about half the time of the process anyway. When you cut that back off the plug of your mold, generally you did something stupid like the mold release was only covering 50% of the part, and now you start over because you couldn't get it all apart. But after learning a few things about what makes things release and what kind of materials you use, I finally got all the molds built. I got all the parts built, and I was ready to assemble a KR. Because of that, this airplane is real tough as far as the skins and stuff that are on it. It is heavy also, but it is heavy for some other reasons. You notice it has a different canopy on it. That's a polywagon canopy. That canopy, just the secondary shell part, we're not including the windshield now, weighs 26 pounds compared to a KR canopy that's probably about 8. The instrument panel in the airplane, which is a full IFR panel, weighs about 30 pounds compared to probably most guys' panels that are under 10 somewhere. And I sort of made a mistake, but I guess I'm glad I did it when I started doing that. I was an IFR-rated pilot when I started building the airplane, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a nice little airplane to practice your IFR stuff in and not be paying $80 an hour for one, you know? So why not make the airplane IFR? So I did that. But the problem is, if you got something, you'll use it. And I've flown this one IFR twice, and it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. IFR conditions are, when you find yourself in that condition, you didn't belong there in the first place with a KR. In fact, you didn't belong there in the first place with a single-engine airplane of any kind if you was really intelligent. But some of us get in a hurry when we're going someplace, and we decide that we just got to get there, and so we'll go pull that stuff. When you encounter IFR conditions, this is not the airplane you want to be in. It's too pitch sensitive, and real turbulence is a problem for you. And I don't know if you've seen these pictures in some magazines of the guys with IFR sweats. You know, they look like they're about to pass out from cardiac arrest any minute. That is really true. And I don't fly IFR anymore. I've decided that, well, gee, it's nice to have the equipment, and I can go do a VOR approach, and I can do some practice, but I only do it if I've got somebody with me and it's a day that looks like this. The engine in this airplane is a Turbo 2180. It's a copy, actually, of the engine that Dan Bill used to run in his little blue airplane out there, and totally identical, in fact, except for maybe the turbo exit pipe, which I have routed hoses around. It does have cabin heat in it. The cabin heat comes right out between the pilot's rudder pedals. It's toasty warm, and it feels great about 12,000 feet. And you can stay warm down there while adjusting the air on top with the little neck of ducts, and you can freeze on top and roast on bottom if you want. But the little NASA ducts up on the top on both sides, I highly recommend giving your airplane plenty of ventilation. You know, a lot of our little airplanes you end up with the little gas fume smells and things just because you're sitting so close to this engine. Anything that happens up front, a little fuel leak or whatever, that ends up in the cabin with you. And if you got real good ventilation, you can get rid of it. Well, that's one thing that this one has is real good ventilation. I've been real happy with that. This airplane I mentioned was heavy. Most KRs come out weighing between 500 and 600 pounds. And this one, before I threw the lower end and a few other things in it, weighed 712. And it used to sit spraddle-legged like this on its gear. And this time when I put the gear back in it, that's a long story we won't get into, but I arced the bar on it due to Dan Deal's suggestion. He had done it first on his airplane and told me what he did, and when I looked at it, I really liked it. It made the airplane stand up straight. And so I have arced the bar that's on this one now, and it stands up straight. But it used to really be spraddle-legged just because of its extra weight, especially when you got full fuel and two people in it. Now, I have flown this airplane as heavy as 1,206 pounds because it can hold 31 gallons of fuel. And I weigh about 150, and by the time I get me and another 150 pounder in there, you can see you've got a pretty heavy airplane. The airplane handles the weight just fine. What you find out, though, is the center of gravity is not too good. It's way aft, and you end up with something that's so sensitive that it will work you to death to get that fuel burned out of the wings and all up into the front of it. This one does have flaps on it. For those of you that are trying to decide whether you want flaps on your airplane or not, I highly recommend them. They don't slow the airplane down as much as you wish they would, but what they will do is on an approach to landing where you are full of fuel and you got two people in it, you put the flaps down, it puts the CG back forward, and it makes it a manageable airplane. It's not trying to come up on its nose all the time. So I highly recommend the flaps. I guess I have to tell you the story about taxiing since Jim already put me in the limelight here. For those of you that haven't taxied a KR, or maybe are not a tail dragger pilot at all, you're in the category I was. I've never flown a tail dragger, and when I started to fly Rainbow Rider the first time, I went and talked to about 3 different instructors and tried to get them to find a tail dragger for me to fly. Well, to make a long story short, over a period of 3 months, I finally found one instructor that had an old Piper Pacer or something that had the tail wheel on it. And I went out on a Saturday morning with him to taxi out. He pulls it out of the hangar. We're taxiing out to the little grass strip. A wheel falls in the hole, and there's a stop sticking up over here that goes through the rag wing on this little Piper. And he sort of looks over there and he said, "You should never do that." He says, "I'm glad I hadn't given you the airplane yet." And, I says, "Well, can we stick a piece of tape on it and go on?" And he says, "No, don't get to fly today." And I says, "Well, when do we get to fly?" And he said, "Try me in a couple of weeks." And I said, "Man, I've heard this from 2 other guys." And so totally frustrated, I went out to the airport. I pulled the wings off a Rainbow Rider, and I decided that I'd teach myself to taxi and not get airborne. And so I started taxiing down the taxiways at first until I figured out they really weren't wide enough for the way that I controlled the airplane. And everybody in flight ops was getting a real good laugh out of it. And so I went out on the runway. Well, fortunately, I'm at New Braunfels, Texas. There was no World War II air base. And it had 3 runways. The shortest one was 8,000 feet long and 200 feet wide. And I thought, that's big enough. So I went out there and got on the one that they weren't using as active. And I got there. At first, I started taxiing about 30 miles an hour. And much to my surprise, I didn't really control the airplane very good at 30 miles an hour. I was afraid to go to 40. Let me back up. My airspeed indicator's in knots, so we're talking 30 and 40 knots. And I taxied around out there for about 30 minutes, and I noticed I kept using all 200 feet wide of this runway. And I went back to the hangar, and I looked the airplane over, and I thought, you know, something must really be out of line. I just really not good at this. I don't have the feel of it. And I looked the airplane over, didn't really see anything, and went back home that day and started thinking about it. Well, the next day I went out and I started taxiing it, and lo and behold, I did a lot better. Well, at the time, I didn't understand why. But later I found out. The first day I was wearing boots because the Texans wear boots, right? You can't feel rudder pedals through boots, especially on something as sensitive as a KR. Well, the next day I went out to the airport, I had these on, okay? I used to call these Dan Deal specials, but Dan Deal says they come from Bob Passmore. Anyway, I had these on and I could feel the rudders real good. And so I started taxiing around, and gee, I could keep it within 50 feet of either side of that little stripe going down the middle of the runway. You know? And so I worked from 30 knots up to 40 knots. Then I worked up to 50 knots. Things were feeling real good. And I put on about an hour's worth of taxi. And finally I decided, well, I wonder if it'll fly with the tail up. And so I went all the way down to the end of the runway and put it on full power, run it up to about 50 knots, and shoved a little bit forward, and sure enough, the tail comes up. Well, you've heard guys talk about this airplane needs left rudder, not right rudder, when you pick the tail up because your engine's rotating the other way. That is really true. Because you can run it right off the runway. And so the first time I got it slid to a halt in the gravel on the right side of the runway, and turned it around and went back and thought, it wasn't dawning on me yet, though, okay? I thought, boy, this airplane really pulls right hard, you know? I wonder why. So I went back, and I tried it again, I lifted the tail, and it started to the right, so I gave it left rudder, and it corrected itself, and I was going down the runway about 60 knots with the tail up. I was feeling real good because I had real good control of it. But what I found out is it's a little bit harder when you go to set the tail back down because now you're dealing with the slop in the tail wheel. Before, you was up and you streamlined, the air had a hold of the rudder real good, and you were really in control. You were in better control the faster you went. But there's a pucker factor there that's involved. And it's hard to overcome it, you know. And finally, through 3 hours of this taxi testing, I actually worked up to where I was running down the runway at 90 knots with the tail up, and at 8,000 feet of runway, I had 20 seconds to do everything right and get it shut down at the end. Well, I was really feeling good about how much progress I'd made. And I called Dan Bill up on the phone, and I said, hey, Dan, I said, I learned how to taxi this airplane. He says, you did? How did you do it? So I told him, he says, you must be crazy. He says, you could have killed yourself. All you have to do is get it sliding sideways one time. It's going to roll like a top. He says, go put the wings on that thing and fly it. You're past being able to control this airplane. And I said, well, okay. So I went and put the wings on it and got it ready for the maiden flight. Well, you know, I was thinking real hard about all this because I was used to lifting the tail at 50 knots and watching the airspeed indicator and the little white stripe on the runway, and going to about 60 knots before I really started moving the elevator in, and I could tell I had a little pitch, you know. Well, even at 90 knots, my airplane never come off the ground. Of course, it's heavy. Probably some of these out here, if you pull the wings off of them at 90 knots, they would start be trying to get airborne. But on the maiden flight, I had remembered everything I taught myself in taxi test, and so I headed down the runway, and after 40 knots passed, I started pushing forward on the stick, and I was watching the airspeed indicator waiting for 90 knots, okay? And I felt the airplane do that. Well, I looked down, and I'd been flying for the last 1,000 feet and never knew it. I was waiting for 90 knots to rotate. I thought, you know, you put wings on airplanes, they really do fly. Well, that first flight lasted, I guess, about an hour and a half, and I had a great time up there. I was really worried about coming in and landing because I didn't know if everything that you did to take off really was going to work when you landed. And I come in and set it on the end of the runway at about 100 knots. I had decided that thou shalt not stall, and sure enough, it didn't. And it floated probably for 3,000 feet before I could get the wheels in. And the first flight, the landing was totally uneventful. I was so far past handling that airplane from that taxi testing that, you know, the first landing, we had that on videotape, and shoot, it's probably the best one I've ever done. I'm pretty rusty now, but after all that taxi test, I'd really learned something from it. Well, I've bored you to tears probably, but if there's any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer some of them. Thank you. Good. It was a fast taxi.
Thank you, Al. Al doesn't like to talk about his airplane, does he? We appreciate that. I've got one more pilot I want you to listen to, and we've saved some more for this afternoon. And that's the guy you saw his plane flying just a little bit ago. And Marty has done a lot of things with his airplane. I think he's rebuilt it 2 or 3 times and gone through different engines. So if he could share a little bit of that with you, Martin Roberts, Eastern Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I'm probably the current prop tester, gear tester around right now. I have about 5 props to my credit, 3 gears. A lot of my problems due to probably a little bit too fast approach, flaring a little bit too high, not keeping a good tab on approach speed. I think that's going to be a pretty important item for everybody here, especially the head blown tail drag. The airplane is real quick, very, very sensitive on pitch, and it's going to get most people in trouble once, at least. As everybody can see, I now have 6 gear in it, which I wish I'd done in '85. It has solved a lot of problems. Made the plane more stable on the ground, easier taxiing, very solid landing if I get the speeds down. Very comfortable. My airplane has a 2180, it's a same engine as Steve Bennett's. It's a great plane. It's Dan Dill's engine with his case and all. Pretty good little engine. I had an 1835 before, and it was a great little engine. I'm using an Ed Service prop, which I highly recommend. It's been a lot better than anything I've used for speed, for climb performance, for cruise. Quieter than what the French tip was. What more can I say? You know, it's just a good prop. If you're looking for a prop, nice prop. I can't really tell you a lot about the airplane. It's just it's a joy to fly. I stayed with the plane pretty much all the way through the airplane. A little different design on the canopy. The weight on the airplane is 628 pounds now. I lost 14 pounds going this 6th gear. Also, going with 6th gear, I lost a lot of the air infiltration from underneath that I used to freeze my legs off with. Now, I have no air entry. I have no cabin heat, and it was comfortable coming up. But of course, we had pretty warm winter. It also cut down a lot of noise, which surprised me. I didn't expect that. So I believe this 6th gear is really a good way to go. Dan doesn't feel as though I lost any airspeed. I can't really tell. I know on climb out I seem to be a little bit slower on climb, but maybe on cruise speed, maybe I didn't lose much. But I'm not fared in yet either. So I feel like that's going to help considerably. A good set of wheel pants on the tires should help. My cruise speed is somewhere between 100 and 200. So I won't tell anybody any lies. That's all I want to say. Any questions? Well, I can give quite a few details. My first gear failure, originally when I started building this airplane, I started building it as a tricycle gear with debris gear. And I had cut the gear legs off and molded them together to make a tricycle gear. Had most everything done on the airplane. And I got looking at it and I said, hey, I don't have any room. There was no cabin room left. It wasn't a 2-place airplane anymore. So I scrapped everything out, the year's work, started all over again, and I took those gear legs down to a welding shop and had them welded back together. Done. Really done. I left out of the airport one day, made it, I thought a good takeoff, and the tower called and said, "One Mike Romeo, do you have a problem?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." And I went on, flying around, and a little bit later, Dan Dill come on the radio. "Hey, Marty, you've got a problem." Up underneath the airplane, here's this gear dangling off the brake cable. It's dangling around. I flew around for an hour and a half that day, burning off fuel, and I had a Phillips screwdriver. The gear light's on the left side. A little old hole down here between the castings. I'd stick my finger in there and find that 32-strand stainless steel cable holding that gear up underneath my airplane. I'd trim it out the best I could, take my hand off the stick, take a screwdriver, a Phillips screwdriver, and flick that cable one time, because then I'd lose the cable. Then I'd have to trim back out again. Did that for an hour and a half. And finally cut that cable off. The gear fell off. Away it went. So I come in for landing. Shut everything down, fuel mixer, mags, whole works. Beautiful landing. Just slid down the runway nicely. Didn't tear up anything. Didn't even break a prop. Nice, probably one of my better landings. Well, I didn't have much problem with the FAA over that, other than they wanted to know where that gear fell. They didn't hit a cow or a house or something. We had the Boy Scouts and everybody out looking for that gear. We never found the gear. Well, that was the first year. About 3 months ago, I went in Riverside and I failed to put my gear down. I mean, I just outright failed to put my gear down. They beautiful landing though. Real short approach.
Go with that gear.
Prop, belly, stuff. That was my fault. I freely admitted to it, which I will never admit to the FAA again that I made a mistake.
Everybody look this way.
We've got a smart fixed gear under his airplane. That way you don't forget to retract or have to worry about putting them down. My second gear failure this month was an actual failure. I had my gear flash bolt had bent on a landing into a rough airport with Dan Deal. Don't follow Dan Deal in. He landed down the wind. I made jumps down the end of the runway where we ran out of runway. People scattered, in a group like this. They all ran. But I made it. It didn't break nothing. But it did bend the latch. And what we found, I had lowered my gear all right, but it did not lock. When I landed, the gear folded, and I grabbed the handle. You can't hold 625 pounds with your left hand. Maybe right-handed, I don't know. Well, I tried to hold it, and I'd already stalled, and I just couldn't get it snapped back. And so I real quickly hit the throttle, and I got the airplane flying again. But then I thought, damn, did I get the throttle? Not knowing that, I went ahead and shut the throttle, shut the fuel. And what is another problem? New engine, brand new engine. So the next day, FAA was out. Oh, I missed a little thing. I had to go to Oklahoma City for a reinvestigation on private pilots. Does everybody here that has an airplane have all of your paperwork up to date? Let me tell you, it's a job to get everything up to date. ELT, transponder, experimental. You've got to have your transponder certified every 4 years. I didn't realize. Every 2 years. Transponder every 4 years. Two. Okay. So I'm wrong. 2 years. See, they would have got me there. Every 2 years transponder. You got to have a radio license. All your papers got to be in order. Make sure it has the identification on there. Thought that was an airplane. Make sure all the paperwork's up to date. Well, I went through all this rigmarole, getting everything up to date, studying for the test. You know, they were going to retest me. They said, we are going to take your license. They made that statement repeatedly. We are going to pull your license, and we are going to ground your airplane. So, of course, you know, I was 3 months stalling these people. And hey, I'm working 2 full-time jobs. I cannot get off, which is true, almost. Ended up, they said, you will be here. They finally told me, you will be. So I did. On a Monday, I went down, and here's this whole gator wall standing outside watching me come in. And then they disappeared. I went in, and here's this great big old boy. He looked at the airplane, looked at me. He asked me a few questions, which I told him, I said, sure, I made a Europe landing. I messed up. I didn't use my checklist. I've revised that. I was honest with him. I told him I felt like it all served a purpose to make me a safer pilot from now on. Well, they didn't investigate. He went out the airplane, and I thought we were going flying, and he looked at that little thing and sort of looked down at him, and he said, me fly in that? And that was the end of it. He said, I think you realize that you've made a mistake, and I feel like so it was a great relief. The following Monday is when the year collapsed again. Needless to say, I was very nervous. The following day, the next day after that, the FAA was there to investigate. And they climbed all over that airplane. And they claimed that they wrote it up as a malfunction of the gear. The latch assemblies themselves had been, and when you lift the latch, every 5th time the latch would not come down. So in sequence, sometime or another, both latches wouldn't hold. That's what they think happened. So, but now I don't have to worry about latches, gear brakes. It is much solider on the ground. It's much better on the runway. I feel like on rough strips it'll be a much better airplane. Go in now, grass strips and gravel. Much more stable in the crosswind. That's one nice thing about it. You can put a wing down a lot easier now than like that before. About it. Any other questions? Thank you. Anybody want to look at it?
Is it the, is it what the, I mean, is it? Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll try it down. No, the back's already. Oh, that got it.
Well, like I say, I know 2 fellows personally that did a retrack, and they both want to come out. It's a breeze. I got it out of,
couple of years ago was I was out on business in California, and I got to go by Jeanette's shop out there. And I got to see their facility, and it is stocked. It's stocked very well. And I had a real good time because it also happened to be that the KR100 was in the development stage. And I had to beg and plead, but I got one of the first pictures of the KR100 strictly with the fact that I would not show it to anyone. But I looked at it, but no one else did. But while I was out there, I was really taken by how genuine Jeanette was about this whole project. And we got to talk a number of times. And so it's with great honor that I get to introduce Miss Jeanette Rand today so she can talk to you a little bit more about the KR. So let's welcome Jeanette.
Hello, I'm awful glad to be here. This is my first trip to Tennessee. I've wanted to come for the last 2 years. This is the first time we really had the time to do it, and it's been a pleasure. People often ask me, well, how do you like running a business, selling aircraft parts, that sort of thing? It is very interesting. There's never a dull moment. The best part, though, is the people you meet. I think after you get out and walk around, look at the aircraft that's out there on the field, you'll agree you'll find a better bunch of people anywhere. We have recently relocated to a new shop there in Huntington Beach. We've stayed in a very close area nearby my home. I don't like to commute. People don't believe that after they found out that we drove here from California in an Oldsmobile instead of a KR. But we did have to bring a lot of parts with us. We have a bunch of things up here on the table. I thought that I have had so much interest in that fixed gear that we took the time to bring one here so anyone that is interested can look at it. We're still selling the retract gear, of course. It's still, I don't know, I think it goes with a KR, but a lot of people need the fixed for any number of reasons, so we have developed it. The KR100 is flying now and has in excess of 400 hours on it. We're in the process of kitting it. The first 3 kits are already available. We're doing molds now for the pre-molded parts, and they should be ready shortly after the first of the year. It's been a lot slower process than we had anticipated, but it's coming along pretty well now, so we're enthusiastic about that. I just want to tell you how happy I am to be here, and then if you have any other things you want to talk to me about, I will be out around the airplanes, or if there's anything specific you'd like to ask me while I'm up here.
105 or...
It's a fixed tail dragger, and it has the same gear that's sitting right up here on the counter. It was developed for that 100, and we went ahead and designed it for the KR2 as well. Those are the new wheel fairings, and the little fairing in the center is for the tricycle gear that we hope is coming shortly. Vicki, do you know the weight of the whole assembly? She says with the castings and everything, it's approximately 30 pounds. It's within a half a pound of being the same as a retract gear. We've weighed them with, with both the fixed and the retract, and I think a lot of your extra weight with the fixed is with a larger axle, and of course it's got the hydraulic wheels and brakes, and they're a little bit heavier than the mechanical would be. So it's maybe half a pound heavier than the retract. Yes. Okay, she's saying it's without the wheels and brakes, both of them, but it's within half a pound of the 2 gears. Any other questions? Well, I'd like to turn it over to Jim Pond, let him go on with the
We've got a number of planes out here that haven't said anything. Ken, Cottle, why don't you come up and tell us about your KR1.5 and why you call it a half, and what you've done different to it. Can you do that for us?
I'm Ken Cobble. I'm from Covington, Missouri, and the KR1.5 is the plane that I flew in and built, and the name apparently I think was tagged by Dan Deal. I had built the KR in mind that I would put the wing skins that he built, and then we talked him into doing a video so that I'd get plenty of professional help and could get them on real fast. And as we were doing the tape, he kind of looked at it and looked around and said, well, it's not a KR1 and it's not a KR2, it must be a KR1 and a half. And so it stuck by that name. I had trouble with the insurance company because they kept wanting to know what the half meant, and the FAA kept looking around for a half seat somewhere, so I probably should have stuck with the KR1. It took 27 months to build, and I completed the spring of '87. I've been to Oshkosh twice, and this is my second trip to Covington. Since last year, I put an Ellison carburetor on it, which has improved the performance a great deal, and I prefer that over any of the other carburetors that I've put on it. This winter I'm looking for a project. Steve Bennett's update for an 1835 to increase it to the 2180 to get a little bit more performance so that the climb will increase, and also so that I'll pick up an additional 20 miles per hour. I'm not real deep into aerobatics, but I do enjoy messing around, and I think that additional performance would really be a great big help. I'm not real sure what you would like to know. You have any questions about the plane that anybody would like to ask? I get a 140 mile an hour cruise. I have a Loran mode C and transponder. It stalls around 52, and it actually doesn't brake until it gets down around 45, and when the stall breaks, it breaks straight forward, and actually it'll kind of mush like a Cherokee 140 if you keep all things straight. I really don't do a lot of stalling because that's just a little bit too slow for me anyway. Airplane is 800 and 500. Must be 553, thereabouts. I would certainly like to have a good pair of scales to reweigh it. No, I ran it for about 6 months with a gravity feed, and it ran real good. And I put a fuel pump on it and found out it even runs better. So I have it hooked up so that it will, with a check valve and a gravity feed in case of electrical problem or fuel pump failure, then it will continue to run off of the gravity feed. But when you put it in a climb out or steeper maneuvers, the fuel pump just makes it operate a whole lot better. Any other questions? Well, I started with the Superposa carburetor, and took it off, and I had 2 Ellison carburetors, and I went back to the Superposa and got it to running pretty well, but there's inherent problems from what I'm no real technical, but it depends on how much fuel you had in the tank as to how much fuel pressure you have in the carburetor, and so there was things were continually changing. Where on the Ellison you don't have that problem. Any other questions? I do have EGT, and I monitor both left and right exhaust stacks. They run normally cruise around 1,300, mine are, and I think it depends on how close to the exhaust it actually is. One of them will indicate about 100 hotter than the other, or a little less than 100 difference. And I also have 4 CHTs so that I can monitor all 4 cylinders. I found that they all 4 don't necessarily have to run this thing. No, I do not. I don't find a lot of difference in anything between high cruise and full throttle, even speed-wise. Slow flight on EGT, there are times, seems to me like on climb out, they'll tend to go up close to 1400 with full rich mixture. And I can actually, I don't know, it sounds like you're getting on the back side of the mixture, but I can lean it out and you actually, EGT will cool down some. And the cylinder head temperature doesn't go up. So I'm assuming that it's just getting a more economical mixture. If you put too much fuel, too rich, it tends to burn too hot. Too lean, it'll get hot and then cool off again, from what I understand. So I'm not real sure. I do have a pressure regulator. I've mounted both the fuel pump and the pressure regulator between the tank and the gascolator. And I put the fuel pressure regulator, and it's regulated somewhere between 2 and 6 pounds. When you put your finger over it, it runs. It squirts about that far. I don't know what the pressure is, but it's light. But it's not so strong that the gascolator won't hold the pressure. I don't imagine it's any greater than if it was like on a Cessna 172 or something, probably around 2 to 5 pounds, something like that. It just takes it for that you get a good constant supply of fuel. It's made a big difference. Any other questions? Thank you for asking. I've certainly enjoyed flying here.
Mike Helms? Here? Mike? No? Herb? Where are you at? Herb Bull? He went to town. Okay, what about Eldon? Is Eldon here? Yeah, there he is. Why don't you go over here and tell us about your airplane, Eldon?
Well, sitting out there, I've built it along with a friend of mine, Jim Wally, who's not in the meeting today. Some of you here, I think he was here a couple of years ago. We really spent about 4 years building this airplane. Really only should have took 3 because he had a heart attack and was out for quite a while, and I just flat got burned out on it, and just kind of left it set for about a year, and that's really, it was when it was about 90% complete too. So for some reason I could never visualize it flying then, or amounting to that much. And if I had to do over again, I'd buy wing skins. There must be 1,000 hours of sanding on those wings. But it's a lot of fun to fly, and if you're building one, hang in there, because it's well worth it. And something you get a lot of enjoyment out of, and I'm no different than a lot of other guys that's flown them. They're a little short-coupled and a little squirrely, and I'd not had any tail dragger time, and there wasn't any tail draggers in my area that I could really get any time in. And I read this article in Sport Aviation, how if you had a converted auto engine and an untested airplane and low time pilot and no tail dragger time, which I was all of those, why the worst thing you could do was fly your own airplane. Don't do it. And I guess probably showed my stubbornness, because I did it anyway. I did not taxi at 90 miles an hour. I did not taxi without the wings on. But I did go out and probably taxied about 3 hours, I suppose, not all at one time, but about the first half hour, that was about all I could take right then, and it was so squirrely that I wondered if, what have I done here? Built something I can't fly? Because I was all over the runway too, but after about another hour, there's kind of that transition period there from, about the speed that you start to get the tail up, that the rudder's not real effective and neither is the tail wheel. And of course now I've gotten to where you just, you give it full throttle and you zing right on through that period, which is way the easiest, rather than to try to feel your way through it. But if you've never done it before, why, feeling your way through it's probably the best. But about 3 hours time, and first flight came on May the 10th, about 9 o'clock in the morning of this year. And believe it or not, it was a perfect flight and perfect landing. I couldn't believe it myself. I greased it on and just, I don't know if I've ever made that good landing since or not, but that first one was good. It's got a Limbach engine in it, weighs about 546. Here again, probably if you were to weigh it right now, I've probably added a few more little things, and it's probably a little heavier than that, but that was originally in a way. I have generally cruise around 150 in a shallow dive. I've seen 190 on it. It feels real good, and I really enjoy flying it. Mike, I can feel for anybody that's had landing problems. I might tell you my story. It may save you a landing gear failure sometime. I've had one too. After I had it flying about 2 weeks, and Marge Wally, the wife of my other partner, the fellow that helped me build it, she's an excellent pilot. Has more hours really than being a pilot than I do. But of course, she's never flown a tail dragger or anything quite that short coupled either. And I took her out with me we went to go taxi and let her taxi. And I had to straighten her out a couple of times when it got a little bit crossways, and she was getting onto it. Things were going quite well, and I was on the left side where the brakes was. She was running it from the right side. Have center stick and dual throttles and dual rudder pedals. But she was doing quite well, and I got relaxed. I guess I should have been more of the instructor type, and I wasn't, so it was partially my fault too. But at the Manhattan airport where we had a 7,000-foot runway, and you start out there and just taxiing down the runway, well, you've got quite a little runway there to play with. You're just taxiing, and I was sitting there all relaxed, just looking out the side, and she didn't have the tail up, so she couldn't see over the front. And all at once, in a quite elevated voice, she says, "Stop this thing!" I looked up, and the lights at the end of the runway were right in front of me. Got hydraulic disc brakes. I built the Happy latch system with the pins that stick out, spring-loaded pins that stick out to the sides, which is a very good system, I think. build it out of the 6061 T6 aluminum like the plans call for. But in that situation, I got right on those brakes. Believe me, I got right on them brakes. And the brackets that come up from the spring bar that hold those bolts or pins, whichever you want to call them, that aluminum, those just twisted around. The inboard part of them is twisted around to let them bolts come at an angle and then just pull right out of the holes. And of course, gear folded up. If you're wondering how much a crankshaft is for a Limbach engine, it's $928. So $2,000 later, and the emotional letdown and the physical letdown and everything else with it, have on that Limbach have the Happy Tube exhaust system, which bolted on there quite well. But that kind of felt the crunch and a few other things. So anyway, I rebuilt that system out of 4130 chrome moly and bolted back on top of there. And also the arches with the holes in them that those pins go in out there, those are out of chrome moly now. And it actually works better than it did before because the bolt's sliding against the aluminum before, and that aluminum tends to gall a little bit, and then the holes will, the 4130 just seems a lot better way to go than that than the aluminum. That's about it, I guess. Mine is fit pretty close. Now, I read that article in the KR newsletter where it said you ought to egg them out a little bit. You have, yours is made out of aluminum, isn't it? Made out of steel. Yeah. Started down here yesterday from Junction City, Kansas, and got to about West Plains, Missouri, and the sky seemed to meet the ground, and I stayed all night in Lebanon last night. Any other questions? Thank you.
Not the oldest, but as the oldest plane flying that is definitely here today. Somewhere well over 1,000 hours, I think you keep track anymore. But Dan has an airplane business. He sells the wing skins, and I'm sure he's got a lot he can share with us. So welcome, Mr. Dan Deal of N4 PD, right? Great.
Any questions? After introduction like that. Most of you know me, I've been around forever. About the only thing I've done since y'all have seen me last year is I put in the Type 4 engine. And there's been I've heard a lot of people wanting to go the Type 4 route and everything like that. It's a really nice engine. I think in the long run it's going to prove to be a very reliable engine. Everything in it's kind of beefy and meaty, and one thing I really noticed was how much cooler the cylinder head temperatures will run. It got more fins on them, things like that. It's designed to produce more power. And you don't have to, at 2600 cc, it doesn't seem like it's working as hard as the 2180. But really, I think a 2180 is a whole lot of engine for the KR, and really plenty. So if you're already kind of headed in that direction, I'd just stay that way. At this, when I had the 2180 in mind to go to the Type 4, I spent another $3,500 to do it, and since I already had a good motor, I wouldn't spend another $3,500 to do the Type 4. It isn't worth that much more. If you don't have any motor at all, you might take a good look at it, because I think it's going to be a good one. Really, I'd put that engine in there because I'm testing it so I can put it in a new airplane that I'm kind of building, sort of working on it once in a while. So anyway, I'll probably end up putting my 2180 back in old blue. The only other thing that we've really done or experimented much with this year is we've been playing with landing gears just a little bit. Seems to be a trend back towards the fixed gear. And I was really after some kind of real lightweight gear. You know, the stock landing gear is fairly heavy. The aluminum spring bars are getting, there's kind of a lot of weight there too, and I was after something that you could spring it pretty hard and it would come back and not be sprung, if that makes sense. So anyway, Marty Roberts, we put our first one on there. We ran some load tests on the fiberglass gear. I have pictures here if you want to see them later of the load test going on. And we put 2.5 Gs on it and flexed it 3 inches. And the design on the thing is to go to about 5 inches before it would break. So at 2.5 Gs, we were a little past halfway on what it would be good for, but we had a 2,000-pound come-along, and we were bending the handle on it. So we couldn't get any more pressure with our come-along to get more weight hanging on the thing. We've also, as some of you already heard, we built a little tricycle gear. It's going to be a fixed tricycle gear and real easily adaptable, just a bolt-on arrangement where it would tie onto the 2 lower engine mount bolts and to the firewall. Like just a few bolts and a little bit of drilling, and you have this thing mounted in 15 minutes. And it worked really neat. We had a little casting. It was a full castering affair, and the fiberglass main gear, and with hydraulic brakes for steering, just like the Grumman series airplanes, the Tigers and Yankees and Cheetahs, all of those. They use brakes for steering. It works really neat because you can pull right up in this little slot right here, lock one brake, turn right around it, and go right back out. You can turn on a dime. Really kind of neat that way. But anyway, it was going to be here. Some of you remember Bob Passmore's airplane. He lives in Boulder City, Nevada. Has for about 3 years and hadn't been back to Tulsa to fly his airplane. So he sold it recently to a guy that lives in Tulsa who bought it for his son who lives in Florida. Okay, so I convinced the old man that this kid who has barely 100 hours over the last 5 years and hadn't flown very much, nothing besides a 150, that he was probably going to knock the gear right out from under this the stock gear out of the KR. If he came up here, he's going to make a couple of flights and then head for Florida in it. I said he'll never make it there, so we really should put the tricycle gear in it. Okay, so we spent about a week putting the tricycle, really a good weekend is all it took to put it all in. We took it all apart Friday, and then Saturday morning we put all the gear, bolted it in, and we were flying it, it was Monday or Tuesday, I guess. Time we got the paint and everything on it. Anyway, and I flew it and everything was great. Land on the mains and you let it roll out and then you let it easy down on the nose. Well, the kid that was flying it, I flew with him a couple of times and he made me sick just once around the pattern, all of this action. And I thought, this guy doesn't really have a feel for it, so I made him make a full stop landing. And actually I flew it 3 times before I let him get in the left seat and try it. And then I put Steve Alderman. This was just like yesterday morning, and the airplane was doing great. And Bob's airplane, little hot rod. In fact, all of your T-shirts, that's Bob Passmore's airplane. And so anyway, the guy had made several landings with Steve, and Steve was shaking his head thinking this guy really does not have a grip on this airplane at all. Just terribly pilot-induced oscillation. It would start up, and it's like 1, 2, 3. It hits the brain. I need to push forward on the stick before we stall. And now we're going down. Whoops, I overdid it. Diving at the earth. 1, 2, 3. I better pull back before we crash. Just way behind it. It's kind of like someone turned the lights on, okay? And so anyway, he came in, he made 2 or 3 of these before he hit the runway, and on the 3rd one, he just dove it straight in. And it wiped out the nose gear right down the nose, slid along the nose. This was about 2 o'clock yesterday, and we're trying to teach him how to fly this so he can fly to Covington with us and then go on to Florida tomorrow. Probably saved his life because of the crap that we flew through getting here last night. We'd have lost him anyway. So anyway, so our fixed tri gear, that's going to be a real simple, fairly inexpensive mod that I think would be easy to do, isn't here because of that. But anyway, because he drove it into the ground, we found the weak link. Everything has a weak link, no matter what it is. This thing here has a weak link. Okay, it may be strong enough, but somewhere it will break. Well, we found out where it breaks, and so we'll beat that up. And we did a real good load test on the main gear, but haven't done the nose gear. This was kind of a, look, we got a week to go type of deal. And so I don't know how many G's the nose gear was good for before it broke, but I do have some more of those castings that we are going to load test now and break when the airplane gets put back together. And so we'll know what we got there anyway. But it's, a little bit down the road. But I may convert mine. That thing flew so neat. And, you can sit up there and you can see out of the dash, out of the windshield. You just drive it around kind of like your car. It really took all the work and worry and effort out of flying the little airplane. The toughest part of a KR is getting the darn thing back on the ground. And that just made it a piece of cake. Ought to work real neat like on rough strips and things like that. I think the gear's pretty tough. It's going to be that way. Any questions at this point? Yeah. Flaps. Yeah, he's got flaps, and I made one landing with flaps and two without. No, as far as flying the airplane, no difference. Well, the flaps are kind of a nice addition since you brought that up, because they really do kind of pitch the nose down without building your speed up, give you better visibility.
Will the landing rollout be longer, efficiently, if it was found
I wouldn't think so. How good are the brakes? You get on the mains, hold the stick back, and keep it up on the mains, and get on the brakes as hard as you can. If that doesn't do it, let it down on the nose and get on some more. Yeah, I don't expect any longer rollout. Yeah.
What did you do with the main gear?
You mean how did we make it?
Well, yeah, how did you do all the stuff?
Oh, the main gear. I've got some pictures here. You want me just to pass them around? Y'all can look at them while we're talking about this. They're load tested and two pictures of them going into Mark Roberts' airplane.
Probably about the same weight as your original retract deal, wouldn't it?
Well, the castings that we took out, the stock gear, the little hinge castings, the leg castings, and the bar weigh 28 pounds, no bolts. And this whole deal was 14 pounds.
But I'm saying the tri gear probably wouldn't be any heavier than the original.
Oh, the nose gear weighed 7.5 pounds. Wheel and everything.
You had to check the back,
Okay, to balance it out, on the tail dragger version, there's a casting and the gears then you bolt it to the front of the main spar, just outboard the fuselage, and they kind of go forward at an angle. And then on the tri gear, you just put them on the back of the spar. Same piece. That's it. All you got to do is get, like an inch behind the FCG limit, so that it doesn't tip back. And if you all get in it and then it tips over backwards, you're way out of CG. It's kind of a good measure. I think with two of us in there, and the kid was maybe 15 pounds bigger than me, bigger than I can't give you a number, but one of the guys picked up the nose, and you could pick the nose wheel off, and it was maybe 25, 30 pounds up there. Maybe not quite that much. Oh, it'll retract. This gear we're talking about is fixed. It doesn't retract. I'm not really trying to sell the gear. I don't know that I'm going to. I've talked with Jeanette. She may handle it. It may never come about, but we've got enough parts for 4 of them built. And so it's an experimental deal for now.
He's not.
You're talking about the stock gear again. We're talking about our new fixed
Throw
gear.
your stock gear away. Yeah.
Throw all the stock gear parts away. For the tri-gear. Right, for the tri-gear. And we didn't tie between the front and the rear spar. We're mounted just outboard the fuselage. You'll see in the pictures going around how the thing mounts up. But anyway, we didn't see a problem there. Yeah. Yeah, he was asking me about speed, and Marty goes like crazy. We ran pretty hard coming over here, and he stayed right up there. He's got a smaller engine than I do. He thinks he's indicating less, but he's closed up all the holes in the bottom, so his cabin pressure has changed. And so he's indicating more accurately. He was indicating pretty fast compared to what he was really doing. So it looks like he's going faster, but when you get it up flying next to mine, he's hanging right in there. But Marty's, he's had it flying 2 weeks, so, or less. So I think with some wheel pants, I don't think you're going to notice much speed difference. It's hard to say, Bert Rutan everybody used to talk to Bert about, why don't you put retract gear on the mains of your long easy? And he said those main gears hanging down there at 180 miles an hour costing you about 4 miles an hour. And they're way big long things hanging way down there. So I think if the speed's worth flying, if you're building a fixed tricycle gear airplane, your speed is not your number one criteria. You're after utility in the first place. And so I don't know that it's going to cost you 3 or 4. What?
How would weight compare on the Type 4 to the...
Type 4 compared to the other one. My 2180, as I remember, weighed 178 pounds. And this Type 4 weighs 191 without the carburetor or exhaust or prop. So I've added, 20 pounds or so?
You use soft paper on the crank?
Well, the Type 4 uses a special crankshaft. And it's that special, the big hub from Great Plains. It's got the big bearing in the front. You got to go that route, guys. You just got to. You try to hang it on that little deal that comes on the Type 4 stock crank.
Force 1 bearing.
Force 1's what it's called, yeah. And he's got something that's kind of little known secret that Steve offers, and he doesn't brag about it. But he's got a special Woodruff key cutter he had made. And you know how the stock Woodruff key in the front, it's flat on the sides and then it's round, it's a half circle. But it's square shouldered in the bottom. He's got one that's got a round bottom to it. It's this way, but it's also, does that make sense? If you look at it from the top, instead of looking like a rectangle, it's shaped like an oval. Okay? And the standard deal, when you gear one up, when you hit the prop, that where the cranks seem to all break is they tear out that keyway because they got a sharp corner and cut at the bottom in there. And the round bottom keyway, Martin Roberts has tested it already, gears it up, tore the engine down, and it didn't tear the keyway at all. So sure, you're going to spend a little money, maybe $80 putting that keyway in, but he didn't have to buy another $500 crankshaft. 800 now. Aren't the name tags a neat deal? People all the time, I'm real lousy with names anyway. People, hi Dan, how you doing? I see him once a year. I always feel real bad. Hey Joe, how you doing, guy? And I know you'll recognize your face. I always feel kind of embarrassed because I never can remember a face. But this has really saved my life today. It helps everybody get to know. You see a name and a face and they start going together. Whoever invented name tags, smart guy. That's all I've really got unless y'all have something.
2180. They're both based on the Type 1 engine. The most popular of which are the 1835 and the 2180. Dancer used to have a 2180 in it, but it wasn't one of ours, it was detailed up. L. Campbell's has a 2180 with a few of our parts. Bert Bowles is a good example of an 1835. Bear in mind they're both based on the type of the Volkswagen Transporter bus, and also what they refer to as the cheap Porsche, which is the 911, 914 Porsche. And because it has that 7-letter word tacked onto it, to give you an example of what the difference is, a connecting rod set for a Type 1 Volkswagen machine to go on a 2180 runs about $128. The Type 4 connecting rod set up to go in a 2600cc Type 4 Porsche engine will run you about $454. And the list goes on. Crankshafts for the Type 1 and the 2180 are roughly $500. In the Type 4, they're roughly $1,000. So you can see what that 7-letter word costs you. It's mainly going to be in your pocketbook. Is it worth it? You know, it depends what you're doing, I really guess. If you're starting out from scratch, the way we're actually trying to sell the Type 4 engine is we have a conversion kit that will convert your Type 4 block into a 2600cc engine. And all you really need, you can buy a complete engine to start with that, because there's a lot of stuff with the engine you're going to need. Such as the baffling, the cooling tin that goes underneath the motor. Push rod tubes you can use, camshaft you can use if you want. But the primary advantage of it is you need just a good engine case and a good set of cylinder heads, because for the most part that's all you're going to use out of the motor. You can find a good used Type 4 engine for anywhere from $50 up to $300, depending upon who has it and what they know about it and how much they think it's worth. We sell a complete Type 4 engine, which we've never sold one because I'm not interested in really doing that, for about $5,800, which in my mind is just ungodly for what's supposed to be a cheap motor. I really don't try to push that to anybody, but I really like to sell you the conversion kit for that, which is priced at about $3,000, which converts your engine into what you see here. What's the advantage of the Type 4 over the Type 1? Well, some of the advantages, for one, are the exhaust manifolds. If you notice, they don't come out of the front of the cylinders, they're on the bottom of the cylinders. It just makes cowling the front of the engine much simpler. And it reduces the exhaust prop clearance a lot, so you don't have to worry about burning the front of your cowling. One of the other advantages of it, to me, which is probably one of the main advantages, Dan's engine doesn't have it because he apparently has a 2-liter engine case, is they have a fuel pump on it. The fuel pump, instead of being mounted on top of the engine right here like it is on the Type 1, it gets mounted down here on this side of the engine on the Type 4. And it's down, it's out of the way, it's very reliable. If you by chance do have a 2-liter engine case, because there's quite a few number of those around, we can machine your fuel pump into the Type 4. My machinist made a jig for it for about $85. He can drill the holes and add the bushing and make the push rod so that you can add the fuel pump to the Type 4, even if you have a 2-liter engine case. Some of the other advantages of Type 4 are the main bearings themselves. The main bearings are roughly 200 thousandths larger in diameter than the Type 1, which makes for a much more rigid crankshaft. Aside from that, the engine case itself, you can either look at one of two ways, as an advantage or a disadvantage. The engine case is 14 pounds heavier than a Type 1 engine case, and it's made out of entirely aluminum, not magnesium. And by in weight, in airplanes, we're usually very weight conscious. We don't want weight, but this is one case where the weight really pays off because it just makes for a very solid, durable engine case that for the most part is described by all Volkswagen enthusiasts as what they call bulletproof. It's one of the things that hardly anybody ever has any trouble with is an engine case or an engine case wearing. And in fact, they only make bearings in 2 oversizes, 20 and 30 thousandths for the Type 4 engine case. In a Type 1 engine, to look like in a Warshawski's catalog or something like that, you see they go clear out to 80 thousandths. And the latest catalog I have from one of our suppliers, they now have 100,000 main bearing sets. There's not a lot left in the main bearings after you go that far out in the saddles. If you notice, this also features our Force 1 prop hub, which is one of the main expenses of the motor. SCAD Enterprises in California makes a special crankshaft for us. It has a straight nose from the camshaft timing gear forward rather than a step-down nose like it is on a Type 1 or a Type 4. And by doing that and a few other things they do for it, it brings the cost of the crankshaft up to roughly $900. And then on top of that, we don't have to put a keyway in it, so we install a round bottom keyway, as Dan was mentioning earlier, which adds another $85. So by the time you're done, you have $1,000 in the crankshaft alone in the Type 4 engines. Oh, it's a very hefty crankshaft, yeah. It's,
You don't have one you have to worry about, you know it's going to hang.
yeah, I'd say that's true. Yeah.
All the guys good as in,
Yeah. Recently, in about the past 6 months, because of the interest on the motor, we've done a little testing and machine work. And if you have a stock 66 millimeter 1700 crank or 1800 crank, or if you have a 71 millimeter 2-liter crank, we've developed a new fixture for it. And what we do with the crank, we machine a piece that goes onto the end of the nose of the crankshaft. And then we spot weld it in 2 places. And we taper that for our prop hub, clear back to the distributor drive gear. And then our machinist matches our prop hub, the Force 1 prop hub, to the crankshaft. And he machines the round bottom keyway halfway in between the old crankshaft and the new nose that we install on the crankshaft. And then he deep drills the crankshaft about 3 inches to install on the bolt. And this way, if you don't want to spend the $900 for the crankshaft, you can still use the Force 1 prop hub, which is probably the only way to go on that size engine, and use the stock crankshaft, which will save you about $500 in the cost of the crankshaft. The machine work to do that crankshaft is going to run roughly $250 to $300. You're still going to have quite a bit of money in it, but at least it is a crankshaft you can use. The stock Type 4 crankshaft, by the way, 66 or 71 millimeter, is a forged crankshaft. It's made out of 1045 steel, which is the same as the 69 millimeter Type 1 crankshaft is made out of, which is very good quality. If you notice on Dan engine here, one of the other things that he's added on here is a dual ignition system. So what you see right here, these are the 2 coils. It's got the solid state unit that goes up front and distributor drive gear. It's actually been around for quite a few years. It's made by a company out in California. The older models of it had a little brain box that you had to add back on the firewall. The newer updated version of it, of course, which is what's here, it's just a solid state unit with 2 coils, and that's all that's needed. We can also manufacture them with a centrifugal advance in if the person would want to use it by himself. One of the biggest things with these coils of these type, if you come up and look at them later, if you look at the coil, it's not an oil-filled coil like you use on some of the later model automobiles. And what that means to you is you have to keep the coils cool. One other manufacturer in past years has a system 100% like this, and they recommend you mount the coils on the back of the accessory case. And I cannot recommend anyone to put the coils on the accessory case or the firewall unless you have them enclosed in a box with a plastic to them when they're running. These coils have a critical temperature of 200 degrees. When you exceed that temperature, you're going to, for the most part, destroy what is in the electronic gizmos here up front. It just doesn't work well. Several ways you can measure the temperature, of course, in the coil with thermometers. One of the things we've recently purchased are little heat pellets that you can tape to a coil or something like this in various degrees, from 113 degrees all the way up to 1200 degrees. It'll measure the temperature for you to see what you're actually running. Yeah? Yeah, that's what you got to watch. That's why it's really critical where you put the coils. On top of the engine here, they may well be exceeding 200 degrees also. If anybody has our current catalog, you notice that we're not selling the system yet. And the primary reason we're not selling it is because In the past, they have had a history of failing, and we want to darn sure that where we're putting coils, that they're not going to be flying along and have the coils conked out on you. Especially if you're running on this system as a single ignition system only, it's not a very healthy way to go. As far as ignition systems goes, if you can stand the hump on the front of your cowling, by far probably the best ignition system for the Volkswagen engine in the airplane yet to date, still the old Bosch 009 distributor. Main objection folks have with it is this: it sticks up on a KR, you're going to have about a 4 or 5 inch hump in it. The advantage of the Bosch 009 is it has a centrifugal advance in it, smoother acceleration and deacceleration. Expense, the Bosch 009 distributor is under $50. With coil and wires, you'll have under $70. With the Slick 4216 magneto, which if anybody's bought one recently, you notice that the FAA PMA approved is no longer on them. They scratched that off because it's not used on a certified aircraft, so they figure they don't need to put that tag on. Yet you're still paying the same price. It makes you wonder if they are FAA and actually PMA approved. They say they are, but from some of the workmanship we've seen on condensers that come out of them, it makes you wonder. But a brand new magneto right now runs $530. You'll have another $92 in an ignition harness and $58 in 4 spark plugs. So by the time you're done, for the most part, you'll have $700 in an ignition system that only pushes a 16,000 spark plug gap. Stock 009 distributor with a single coil will run 28,000 spark plug gap. It has to be much. It doesn't make a lot of sense after we lit them. Now, if you want to do that, about the only thing you really do is, like Steve Whitman does, they just turn the whole engine around backwards to start with and drive off the flywheel. The advance on the engine is like on a 2180, you have 28 degrees, which actually crankshaft degrees is only 14. It is half of what it is. Yeah. Well, you set them at 28 degrees before top that center. But and when you run a distributor, it actually, because it's crankshaft speed, it's half of what it's turning, or the camshaft. It's only 14 crankshaft degrees. That's correct. That's correct. How reliable is stock 009? Or do you mean the magneto? Well, the question is how much more reliable is the 009 over magneto? I can't give you an honest answer. There's just not that large number of people using the 009. My personal feeling is, though, is that the 009 distributor has to be a lot more reliable than magneto, simply because it has far less moving parts. It's mechanical. But it doesn't, a Slick Mag has a 2-to-1 gear reduction system in it for starters. And the point gap in a Slick Mag is only 7 thousandths, and a 009 distributor you run 19 thousandths. And just all the way around, it's simpler. And if you operate on the KISS system where simpler is better, expense-wise and operational-wise, at least I think it's a lot better than magneto. Other than the fact that you're going to have a bump in the front of your column. Any other questions on either the Type 1 or Type 4 engine? Dan? That's correct. Type 4 engine, if you notice over here, the Type 1 engine, the oil cooler sits on top of the gap. Type 4, to save space, this is not a Type 4 cooler, it's a Type 1. Gets in the same space as the Type 4, it's just about an inch less height. That's what's on here. And of course down here is the oil filter, which is stock in the Type 4. It's not a conversion kit, much like that. It's just there. It's just the way Volkswagen made it. We didn't have to do any conversion or machining or plugging this hole and running lines around to do it like you do in a Type 1 engine. That's true. And one of the other things on a Type 4 engine, if a person so desires, you can run stock factory hydraulic lifters or solid lifters without doing any machine work at all. The only difference is that you must change camshaft to solid lifter camshaft does not have the same cam profile as a hydraulic camshaft, and I would definitely not run a solid lifter camshaft with hydraulic lifters, because you're, at least in my opinion, asking for trouble sometime down the road. Performance-wise, Dan's tried both, and I don't believe he's noticed any difference versus hydraulics versus solids. So if you're going to build the motor up, you might just consider going with hydraulic camshaft, because it is a little quieter. I'm not sure you can honestly hear that fine. But you don't have to adjust the balance. This is the big thing. Which, if you're fumble fingers, that might be a good idea. If not, the hydraulic valve lifter system is probably $100 more than the solid lifter system. So $100 is $100 right. One of the other things the Type 4 has is different connecting rods. As we mentioned earlier, the difference in the price. There's also quite a few different rods we've used and experimented with the engine. This engine here, and Dan's engine, was honestly the first one we ever did. It's a prototype running engine. And it has Chevrolet, Love, Isuzu, the Chevrolet Isuzu pickup, which was popular, I guess, back in the mid-70s. And I believe they're about 5.4 inches in length. The current connecting rods we're using in them are the 2-liter connecting rod and the special Chevrolet connecting rod that Scat makes for us. And both of those connecting rods are in the $500 range. What they have going for them, though, is not much machine work on the engine case. With both the Porsche rod and the Chevy rod, there's virtually no machine work whatsoever that needs to be done internally to the engine case. With the Porsche rod, you're going to have to clearance either the engine case slightly or the piston skirt slightly. But with the Chevy rod, it's 100 thousandths longer than the Porsche rod. It's roughly 5.3. Remember, Dan, usually? Did you have to clearance your pistons or your engine case? Yeah. Dan has a Type 4 that he put together himself, also with some of our parts. And he has a Chevrolet connecting rod that we make for the Porsche engine, Type 4. And he didn't have to do any clearancing at all. I just recently did another one for Tom Magneto, and we used Porsche rods in his, and we had to clearance those, not the rods, but we had to clearance the piston skirts, about 20 thousandths. So. But as far as machine work versus the Type 1 and the Type 4, the case itself, just seeing the inside of the Type 1 engine case, it's clearanced quite extensively for the connecting rods. And on the Type 4 engine case, when you use the Porsche 2-liter rod or the Chevy connecting rod that we have, for the most part, you don't do any case clearancing whatsoever. With the Chevrolet Love rods, they're much cheaper than either one of them, but you have to machine the rods themselves, and you also do quite extensive machining on the engine case, especially on the top, I believe, top of the case. Right up here in this area, it's probably down to about 80 thousandths or so at the very top of the case. Any other questions? Yeah?
What compression do you run on those?
Compression? Well, I can go into about an hour sermon on compression ratios. It's really bore everybody to death.
Don't go quite that far.
Okay. This engine here, I believe, did we set it up 8 to 1? 8.2 to 1. Set up for strictly 100 ag gas only. If you want to run automobile gas, unleaded, 92 unleaded, you have to drop the compression ratio down to 7.3 to 1. One of the problems you find with running auto gas, I'm sure a lot of people around here can verify this by personal experience, is when you're using a gravity feed system of auto gas, you have virtually, like in the KR2 here, you have 4/10 of a pound of fuel pressure, of head pressure, that you're developing in your gas tank. And that's at the top of the tank, not at the bottom of the tank. That's the gas on the top of the tank developing at 4/10 of a pound. With auto gas, when you have a lot of heat around it and no fuel pressure in the KR or Sonorai or probably Signet or any of the other aircraft that use a main tank that's built in the fuselage, it just does not provide the fuel pressure to prevent vapor lock, push the vapor lock through the carburetor. And it's guaranteed either a rough engine or an engine quit. You have no choice, it's one or the other. avgas being 100 octane, it's a much slower burning fuel than car gas is, which is all that octane does, it just slows down the burn rate. And it's also a higher read pressure than automobile gasoline is, and it doesn't vaporize the engine. We ourselves try to set all of our engines up at 8 to 1 or 7.5 to 1 or 7.3 to 1, depending upon what the customer wants to use for gasoline. That's strictly a choice you make when you order an engine. That's
What's the recommended fuel pressure?
recommended fuel pressure. That's strictly depending upon the carburetor you're going to run, Jim. For the most part, I honestly can't tell you. It depends on the carburetor. The fuel should not blow by the main float in the carburetor. That's what your fuel pressure should be. And I can't tell you what that's going to be because it's going to be individual to what the carburetor you're running in. For the most part, it's going to be between 1.5 and 4 psi. But the exact number I can't tell you. You'll know when you run your engine if it runs rich, and always run rich regardless of what you do. You know you got too much gas. We had a guy out in Lamar, Iowa, that had a KR2 with a post carburetor on it, and he was running a facet pump to it, and he had so much fuel pressure in the system that after he turned his gas off, the gas valve, his engine ran for almost 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and the longer it ran, the smoother it got. And it was just because he had so much fuel pressure and so much fuel there, it took that long to get rid of it. Any other questions? Yeah?
What kind of differences are there between the 1.7 and 2 liter?
What differences are there between the 1.7 and 2 liter case? The primary difference is the 1.7 engine was a carbureted engine. It has the fuel pump is all machined on the side of the engine case. On the 2 liter engine case, they were, I believe, all fuel injected for the most part. The fuel pump was not machined inside the case, on the side of the case. That's all the same. It's the same engine case. It's just that one was machined and one was not machined. They just didn't do the machining operation when they went to fuel injection. Yeah?
I was always confused about the type 1, 2, 3, and 4.
I'm still confused to this day.
I went through it for a long time. I finally just threw it all out. It was a big block case, small block case, except for the fuel injection and the
A Type 2 engine was also used in the bus, which is the 1700 engine. So you could say that this engine here could be a model of a Type 2 case, but it's also referred to, for the most part, as a Type 4 engine. That's the more popular connotation.
Did one of them have the single water pressure, the other one have the double?
That's only on the Type 1 case.
And fuel injection?
Huh?
Type 3, is that a 1700? Let me throw one in there. I used to work for Volkswagen, stay out work. No, the Type 1 is the Beetle. The Type 2 is the Transporter. And it basically, it was the early, the Type 2 engine was the bug motor that had bosses back there on the back for a rear engine support. Okay? But right now it's what most people call a universal case. It has some 3-point attach points out there for a rear mount. But other than that, it's the same as the Type 1. A Type 3 is virtually the same one, but a Type 3 was what they used to call a fastback and a squareback. And it was a pancake engine. The fan was back on the back of the crankshaft and it blew up over. Again, all the internals are virtually the same. Then you did have the rear mount. But primarily what you difference in is between the Type 3 and the 1 and 2. 1 and 2 had the same sheet metal. Type 3 had a different one. Type 4 was the next generation. That is this style engine. And they made the Type 4 in 17 and 1800 and a 2 liter. All virtually the same block with the exception of the fuel pump location. This here was an 1800 out of a Transporter, and it was fuel injected, so it does not have it's fuel injected, so it does not have the fuel pump driver, which would be real nice because if you run the stock mechanical fuel pump, you put an Ellison throttle body on it and be dialed right in. As it is, I'm running the 32 poser right off of my 2180. Okay.
You could probably get a lot more power with that 30.
Well, with I'm not sure. I think it's a very popular, sometimes misconception that a larger diameter.
Bigger prop.
Well, this prop here, I believe the same prop you ran on 20
The
years ago.
same one, I turned it 200 more RPM, this was really the prop left over from my turbo days. And it was without, the 2180 had kind of a tough time pulling this prop. It was a little bit much for it. But with the turbo, it would do it. It kind of lugged it down low, but when I got to 12 or 14,000, then I had plenty of prop and I could go ahead and run the manifold pressure up there. 56. 56. Potentially makes the prop.
Yeah, that's right.
Ed Sturman and, this is a Warrington prop that measures, well, one measures it by the core, the other one measures it by the flat of the back side, and there's a difference in that angle.
So your engine can actually take more advantage of this.
This prop really is perfect for that engine. Yeah, I'm cruising at 3,100, which is really nice. My 2180, I cruise it at 2,900 with it.
Talking about fuel pressure, say a half a pound, 4 fifths of a pound. Does fuel flowage mean anything?
Fuel what?
Flowage. Run a flow test to the carburetor, to the injector, post injector. Does that mean anything?
Oh, it would have to, sure. To the postal carburetor, from what we've done as far as getting them set up and running, you need a minimum. At the carburetor, where you pull your line off, you need a minimum of about 13 gallons an hour flow at the carburetor for the postal to run correctly. Now, 13 gallons an hour, a lot of people figure that's, am I going to burn 13 gallons an hour? And no, you're not. But when you accelerate the throttle, the postal carburetor does not have an accelerator pump on it. So you have to have a very rich mixture to keep the carburetor in the acceleration mode when you push the throttle forward. And it takes that 13 gallons an hour flow at the carburetor to do that, because you're only operating on the 4/10 of a pound pressure.
The reason I brought this up, I put 1 gallon in my tank and dropped it down X amount, the same as the carburetor did. And of course I got a gallon out in 6 minutes, which would be 10 gallon out. So that tells me not to get the last gallon of fuel, try to run it out.
Yeah.
Postal carburetors come in different barrel sizes.
Postals come, I think, clear up to 40 millimeters. You can buy them.
I have a postal carburetor, but I have no idea if it's 15 and 121. I have no idea.
You'd have to measure the bore size, or it should be stamped on.
What size do you have to run on this?
What, Dan?
Are you using the postal?
This here's a 32 millimeter postal. Yeah.
29 on the 18 inches, Steve. 18, 30, 29.
Yeah, for the most part, you use 29 millimeter on 1835. Yeah.
Why do you discard the fuel injection system?
Why?
Why do you throw that away?
Why do you discard the fuel injection system? Good question. I guess because I don't know enough about it to use it.
I got a couple things on that if you want to listen.
Okay.
Number one, it's going to raise your engine cowling nearly as high as that 4-inch bumper distributor, because the pipes stick up that much higher over the top of the engine. Number two, it's electronic, and it does not mechanically start to fall apart and break down. Like say, you get a set of points in your car that are, the block rubs off and they start getting close together. On a damp day, you're going to have a hard time getting your engine started, okay? You're going to know if you've been working on your own car for a while that points are getting too close together, okay? Electronic ignition can quit in an instant and it gives no warning. It can quit absolutely dead right now, and instant no fuel going through the engine. So I think you're going to find that's why most people are staying away from the electronic fuel injection. Plus you got about a 1 foot by 6 inch and about 1.5 inch thick square box and a whole bunch of wires you got to hook up to it, and they all weigh quite a bit.
Answer your question? Yeah. For a happy starter, the geared starter we have will not fit the happy accessory case or flywheel. They use, I believe, a 12-volt starter, or a 12-volt flywheel. We use a 6-volt flywheel. And theirs is, I think, 132 teeth or 112 teeth, ours is 109 teeth. And it doesn't even come close. So the answer is no. Stock alternator? Now, the alternator is one of those things that's kind of gone through an evolution of change. For about the last probably 12, 13 years, the alternator that's been used in this engine and like Cappy's engines is made by a company called Synchro down in near Alabama. And not too long ago, they sent everybody a letter that bought from them saying, tough luck guys, you sell airplane parts, we're not selling parts to you anymore without any prior notice. So we're all sitting here going, well, that's terrific. You know, there's thousands of these units out there, what are you going to do now? And Tony has trouble. Right, Bob? So, what we wound up doing was contracting with a manufacturer and having units specially built. And I believe we're still waiting for them to get here.
We only have a couple of weeks, but it's one of those deals where you have to buy 50 of them before they'll even talk to you. We wanted to build us 5,000.
And they don't get excited about 50 even. It's like, oh yeah, we'll get that next month.
So we'll get them here pretty quick. The synchro units, don't worry if you've already got one. If you have a part break in, just call me. It's a standard off-the-shelf OEM part, and I'll give you the part number for the other.
Other than the magnet ring, you have trouble.
The magnet ring you can buy too now.
Oh, you can't get that without the flywheel?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the part numbers are all over the counter from OEM. So, they work fine, but if it's a problem, you get a problem with the local big city.
Main difference between the old unit we had and the new unit we're having is